Well, hello again. We're thrilled that you have found us. We are GPS. You can see all around us God's prophetic surprise. We're going through the book of Revelation verse by verse, and we are going to finish Revelation 1 today. We are determined that next show is going to be Revelation 2 and the 7 churches. But there are issues in this passage that we're going to enjoy. So we're in Revelation 1. And verses 17 and 18, we've read it several times, but we can review it again. But thank you for finding us today. We do hope that you'll write us once in a while. We're beginning to get a few emails. So obviously, we want you to be happy and love watching our show. But if you disagree along the way or just want to have us go somewhere or have a question, we're glad to hear about it. So you can write us through LLBN. So GPS at LLBN.tv. And we have to learn how to answer. I've been getting a couple, but I don't know how to answer them all yet. We'll have to figure that out.
Well, we'd love to have a whole show just on questions.
Yeah. And perhaps we can answer some of it here.
Yeah.
I know someone wrote one asking what we talked about with the Lord's Day. Was the Lord's Day the seventh-day Sabbath, the original Sabbath, or was it Sunday, or was it an imperial day, or not a day of the week at all, but just a day of repair and restoration? And they were concerned that a traditional understanding had been sort of moved away from. I'm still pretty much in the original interpretation. But that's part of the fun, is that we want to say enough that's on the edge that you'll engage with us. If it's all just saying the same thing, then we would probably don't need our show. But we're also loyal to what the church has studied in the last 2,000 years, and in our church for 150 years. We respect that too. We'll try to be a balance. Anyway, here we are, Revelation 1, 17 and 18. Do not be afraid, I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forever and ever. And I hold the keys of death and Hades. So I want to deal with at least 2 or 3 minutes with the question of the keys. Does anybody have the right, any religion have the right to say, our religion has the keys? We now have it. I just came from a country that Buddhism is the dominant religion. And we go over there and preach. Basically, we're implying we have something you don't have. And not everyone is comfortable with that on both sides. I've had young people just challenge me. Why are we over here? Why do we think we have something better than what they have? Maybe what they have is better than what we have. Who decides that one particular set of ideas is better than another? And Jesus steps up and says, I hold the keys. I've had Hindus sit with me and say, I have no problem. Jesus is wonderful. I love Jesus. But they don't want to say he has the keys. They're not comfortable with that. Is it appropriate for any religion to claim any sense of ultimacy? We have something of truth that is more than others? Or are we sort of, everybody can have their own favorite? Someone said to me the other day, I think it's like a cookie. You know, you like white macadamia, you like chocolate chip, you like oatmeal raisin. Everyone likes the cookie they like. Who's to say that one cookie is better than another cookie at all? How would you answer that? Who wants to take us on?
Well, I'll say something radical right now.
Uh-oh.
Jesus was not a good man.
And scene.
Yep, and end of story. You see, when a Hindu says, I have no problem with Jesus, I'll just blend that in with everything else. That's the one thing, in a sense, you cannot do. Jesus claimed that he was God himself. He claimed that he had been sent down from the Father to reveal on this earth what God is like in human form. If you believe that Jesus was just a good man, like hopefully I'm a good man, you're a good man, so if you believe that he was a good man, that's impossible, because a good man wouldn't claim to be God.
I am the door.
Yeah. So the things that Jesus said exclude the idea that he's a good person. He's either a lunatic, or he's a deliberate deceiver, or he's what he claimed to be. And the kind of language that he gave is not the language of normal good man humanity. So I hope I I hope I
Very good.
clarified that just a little
I
bit.
certainly agree with that, but I've certainly been in the debate.
Yeah.
I was on a college campus for a long time. And there were those who just were real squeamish, you know, who are you? You're inside your mind, all you have is your perception and what you see. And who gives you the right to say that what I see has any sense of absoluteness to it? All you can tell us is why you see it, and what you prefer, and your cookie, and your song that you like, or what color tie you want to wear. But you have no right to use words like best or better, or I hold the keys. These are words that are not legitimate.
I think that's what's special about the New Testament's claim. Now, it doesn't mean everybody has to buy it. You know, people have the freedom and the right to make decisions. But if it's true that God actually came down and inhabited a human being, that's revolutionary. That changes everything. That means there is no other name under heaven that's quite at the same level as this person. As I said, a person can decide, no, I don't buy that. But if you don't buy that, don't tell me Jesus was a good man, because he made some outrageous claims.
Interesting. Well, I was just going to say, I feel like when I hear those things, because I look in other belief systems and other religions, and I find more hope in Jesus in some senses. I take pockets.
You're comfortable using the word more. More.
Well, no, it builds on my understanding of who Jesus is and who God is. So,
You find more about Jesus in those religions?
yeah.
Okay.
And so, like, I take pieces of those belief systems, and I started, like, I was a clinical chaplain, so I had to have an understanding of most belief systems so I could work with people.
You had to chaplain all those people.
Right, and I had to be in the moment with them in their understanding of whatever their higher power was. And sometimes I'd be like, well, this is a weird experience because this brings me absolutely no hope. But for them, it's just the most beautiful, magical thing, and they just feel so connected and so at peace. And I'm like, well, how does that work? And so then I would have to start looking at things a little bit differently. And when I hear their story and their reasoning for it, it's very similar to why I feel so connected with God and Jesus, and where that message of hope comes in for me. And then there's other things where, like, when I see within Buddhism, you know, and their sense of peace and their desire to find something that centers them, I'm like, okay, so if I take that concept and I can apply that to my worship time with Jesus, and like how, like, I can connect to God and, you know, actually take time for things, as opposed to did my devotions, check that off, go through here, did that, you know, I went to church this week, check that off. You start building a bigger understanding, and God gets bigger and bigger as opposed to smaller and smaller.
So you're saying that we can find more of God in exploring the other world religions?
I think so. I think we need to have an understanding. I think we have to have our basis, but I
You're
think
a Christian.
I'm a Christian.
You've
I'm a Seventh-day
chosen
Adventist.
Jesus. Do you want to say they all are equal? That these are equally legitimate, equally valid, equally clear ways to find God and go to eternal life? Or I prefer this one, I think this is the clearest, but I can get something from these others?
I think for me, what works for me the most is being a Christian. That story, that message, that experience for me brings me hope and clarification and a trajectory.
Why did you decide that?
Why?
Or just because you were born into it?
I struggled with it for a while. I mean, I'm a missionary kid and a pastor's kid. I've been told my whole life that this is the right one. We've gone to countries to tell them that this is the right one. Like, I've been through the whole thing, and I think I actually studied theology predominantly to make sure I actually was a Christian, because I was sick of just knowing the right answer and saying, well, this is what I believe, and this is how it's going to end up, and this is what you should believe too. Where so many people had so many beautiful reasons for believing what they believed. And so I went through the process with a lot of people. You know, I studied Hinduism, I studied Buddhism, I was an art major. Hinduism looked awesome, you know? And through that experience, God came more alive to me, because I was able to see where he fits into other people's lives, even though it wasn't the reality that made sense to me.
Jesus.
But I chose Jesus because I love his character. I love how he fits into the storyline. I like how he points to something clearly, even though it's the most confusing thing simultaneously. I love that he's so tangible, where I think everything else seems so far out of reach for every other belief system. It's just like right on the tip. You may or may not ever make it. Whereas for me in Christianity, you have the hope that you might make something, you might make contact.
In one life.
And right, and
I just preached that in Thailand.
right, and it's not necessarily, but it's not even like I can't go all into it right now, but I mean, it's not even just a traditional concept of reaching something. Like, it's not necessarily the reaching of heaven or anything like that. There's so much more to it. And so for me, Christianity was something that fully embodied how I thought. And it made sense in my journey through life. And it explained so much, where other things just had too many missing pieces for me.
You okay with this?
I'm okay. I think I'm a little bit wary of the conversation that we're having, though, in the sense that that we're trying to, or at least you're posing the question to us of whether we think it's fair to say that Christianity is better or best, right?
Jesus says, I am the keys. I have the keys.
Sure.
Not him, not him, not him. I have the keys.
This is a game of first and second place, though, right? Which I
One
think
A,
is
one B.
right. Which I think is maybe not the best way to approach the diversity of religions and thoughts.
I don't use that phrase. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the
Right.
life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. He doesn't say, I am one of options. You may like someone better, but fine. But, if you come my way, I'd be happy. He says, I am the way. I am God himself.
What's common throughout just about every religion is some sort of promise of ultimate fulfillment or
Through
some sort of
their set of beliefs.
given hope, right?
their leader.
So it's no surprise that Paul tells about Jesus
No, this is Jesus himself.
or speaks through Jesus,
Okay.
saying that he holds the keys to second
Yes.
life or ultimate reality,
But
whatever language we want to use
There's a
there.
but coming.
Well, let me finish.
Oh, family rivalry.
I think that it's important to remember that our goal is to build the kind of community that mimics future fulfillment and second life, heaven, if you will, here on this planet. And so the way that we can do that best is not by trying to give ourselves some semblance of like protection or feel good that we're number one. Yes, Jesus may be the only one to hold the keys to heaven, right? God is the one that can bring us into future life, right?
I really like the point you're making. I really, really like it because it's definitely the tension that we have to live with. And what I hear you saying is, this idea that Jesus is first can do something to us. We can kind of feel superior to other people.
Right.
And that's contrary to Jesus' own message.
Right.
Because Jesus' own message is that the line between good and evil is not between me and you. The line between good and evil runs down through your heart and the heart of every other human being that's been affected by sin. And that means that whether a person's a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Christian, or a Muslim, each one of them has a battle going on for their life. And so if I come and say, well, my religion is the best, right away, in a way, I've lost the battle. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I like that. I like
and
that.
we pit ourselves against everyone else, which is where I think, for me, when I was a kid, is you're busting into these people's homes, in essence, and saying, like, you've had it all wrong your entire life. Let me tell you, because I am the foreigner who has come from the great land of the U.S., and I'm here to save your soul, And, I was like, this can't be right,
If it's wrong to do that, why does Jesus make those statements?
But Jesus bursted into people's worlds as well, but he also revolutionized them in a sense where he broke his own rules of Judaism.
The angel said, today a Savior has come. This is the one.
But he never pitted people against each other in order to trick them into something.
So is there a way to do both? Is there a way to affirm the primacy of Jesus and at the same time be very humble and very embracing of truth that is in other places?
I don't think Jesus shares this portion of himself, him holding the keys to hell, Hades, and death, right, as a threat. But I actually think it's an act of reassurance, right? That Jesus is a character of God's grace and of God's mercy and God's solidarity with us, right?
I can get
so this
you out.
isn't right.
That's right.
This is almost a you should be glad that
Monopoly. I know this
that
game.
God is a God of grace and of justice and mercy, right, in communion. So I don't really want to follow you to the place of using this as an angle of supremacy, over a different religion. I'm not sure that's the point, but rather this is a thing that we should celebrate of God offering to all people, right?
Well, the same author that wrote Revelation also wrote the Gospel of John. And in verse 9 of chapter 1, the Gospel of John, he says, this light, the light that came in Jesus, has enlightened every person who comes into the world. So there's a sense in which there is a piece of Jesus that is accessible to every person, even if they never heard the biblical message.
Amen.
And so what I'm taking away from what you're saying, Andrew, is that when I go to some faraway place, my first step is not to say, oh, I'm way superior to you, you know,
Right.
and not only that, I have white skin, so you really got to listen to me, you know. I think a far healthier approach is to go over there and say, I wonder where Jesus is in this community. I wonder what glimpses of Jesus they've gotten from that light in John that lightens the whole world. The Holy Spirit is there. What is the Holy Spirit doing in this culture? And when I find that, then that becomes the place to connect maybe the thing that I brought that they need.
But also it pushes your understanding of God, because maybe
Yeah.
you'll see something that pushes you to a point where you're like, oh, God is bigger than this. And now I can see that this pushes the envelope just a little bit more, where I see God being bigger. And I think that's where we struggle is I think we're like, here's God, got him, you know, and God can be rolling out of that
Bigger
stuff
than our
as well.
boxes.
Nothing has had more impact on my understanding of the Bible than sitting down with Muslims and talking about Jesus
Absolutely.
and wrestling with the Quran and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
framing the gospel in language that made sense there. It just blew my mind.
We always have to seek to understand before we seek to be understood, right? Jesus, at least how we commonly understand, didn't start his ministry until his 30th year, right? That's a long time to sit and listen and learn and understand what human life is like before Jesus begins to share what he believes is God's message.
That's an interesting perspective. I appreciate that. Yeah, so Jesus even listened first.
Yeah.
Hebrews, I think, talks about that, and I think in chapter 2 of Hebrews, it talks about, no, chapter 5, it's learning. He learned. And it's talking about Jesus. Chapter 5, verses 5 and 6. If you give me just a sec. It was astonishing.
What's the verse again, John?
Hebrews 5:8. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Jesus' whole life on this earth was suffering. I mean, from day one. It just for God to be here was just incredibly traumatic. But it was a learning experience. And then in chapter 2, it's where he says he can be a good high priest because he's one of us. He's lived life the way we've learned it. So that really connects some things for me.
And doesn't it also say through Psalms and Proverbs that basically the fools are the one that speaks? So, I mean, there's something beautiful about being silent and listening and absorbing.
So we should time what each of the four of us
That's
say,
right.
and the one who speaks the least is the smartest.
Oh, Andrew wins.
As usual, there's a both and there's a truth in here somewhere, and everyone's going to have to decide where on this continuum they want to be. And being on a college campus for a long time, I certainly had to wrestle with the idea that we need to be very careful about claiming that I know all, and that I know best. You know, those are very difficult concepts. And that we're all a product of our own background and our mind, and our backgrounds affect everything we perceive and distort whatever. Yes. On the other hand, to be able to say that I know, I cannot ever say something is better than another. Bible is clear. Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It is this. Jesus says this, I want the whole world to know Jesus Christ and him crucified. And the whole premise of writing a book is to say, we think you should know what's in this book. Something is useful to you here. God himself came. There's something about that side too. How to balance those two things with much humility. I mean, I've said to 100 Buddhists in the last 2 weeks, I love what you do. I love temples, and I love meditation, and I love all the rituals and the history and the wisdom of the Buddha. Yes, I do. But I think you need God. And I think Jesus is the best picture of that God that I know. And they'll nod. Yeah, I said, let's take the best of all this. But I love Jesus. He's God himself. Anyway.
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the challenge of Christianity in today's world, it is truly the religion above all others that does make the claim to a unique path. And not just to be one path among many. And for this reason, I think in today's generation, Christianity is the religion that's the most challenging to the younger generation, because they're uncomfortable with that very claim, you see. And I think in order to communicate it appropriately, we have to be sensitive to the fact that that claim has to be expressed in humility and in a learning spirit.
Well, people killed Jesus for it.
Well, 2 Timothy 2, Paul says, the servant of God should not make quarrels, needs to be humble, gentle, teachable.
That's right.
And then God can convince people of what is the truth. But if we come with this sense of, I have the superior understanding and you're kind of stupid, so I decided to come over here and enlighten you.
Just because someone has a hard time does not mean it was wrong. I mean, Jesus, when he said, today the scriptures are fulfilled in your hearing, they were not happy with it. You're just a carpenter. You are nothing special. Who are you to say that? They want to throw him off a cliff. They killed him. So there's a great balance here in how to find a way to do it with such grace and attractiveness. Right. Anyway, we've got a few minutes left. We have one verse that we want to finish. John, we talked about it earlier off air. Verse 19, write therefore what you have seen, what is now, and what will take place. Mm-hmm. And you said somehow that this sort of summarizes really the whole book of Revelation. We've got 5-6 minutes here.
Yeah, I love this text, and there's been some scholarly debate on this verse and so on. And I think a scholar named G.K. Beale, who's a friend of mine, he's done more on this, I think, than anybody. And I think I'm very persuaded that this verse kind of is a summary of the whole book. Because in verse 11 of Revelation 1, it says, write what you will see. And here it says, write what you have seen. So the vision came like between verse 11 and verse 19. He got the whole vision. And now he's instructed, okay, you've seen it, now write it out. And that vision is summarized in two things: the things which are, and the things which will be hereafter. And what makes this interesting is in chapter 4 and verse 1, he picks up on the language here. Revelation 4:1, after this I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. In the original language, it's the same words as 119.
Chapter 1.
So in 4:1, he's saying we're going to get to the future stuff now. But 119 says he also the things which are. And the things which are then would be chapters 2 and 3, the messages to the 7 churches. They're 7 real churches in Asia Minor. We know where those cities are. And so those 7 churches, the heart of that message was a living message to the people of that time. Now, when we get to it, we may also see that it has some prophetic elements as well. But I think, in essence, he's saying, okay, I'm going to start with you readers, with your world, and then in chapter 4, we're going to start looking more and more at the future. And by the last half of the book, you're in the final generation most of the way.
So the 7 churches in the middle are mostly 2,000-year-old relevance, or they're still relevant to us today?
Well, some people would say if the 7 churches, those messages, were to 7 churches 2,000 years ago, then they have no meaning to me. And I say, well, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written to churches 2,000 years ago.
Yes.
Do they have meaning to you? Paul wrote his letters to churches 2,000 years ago. You see, God chose to send these messages in that time and place, and we need to understand them in that time and place. But they have power for today too. When you understand what they meant back then, you also can sense the power of what they mean today.
You will misread how they are relevant to us today if you don't do that original work.
Right. If you just read this as if it was written in 2005, you're likely to completely misunderstand it.
But it's also going to be true that Revelation is going to have a high relevance for whichever generation is the last one.
Well, this kind of reading opens up to that. Chapters 2 and 3 are going to find application to everywhere. And it even says, each one, whoever has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to these churches. So if you got an ear and you got an ear and the people listening have an ear, it's for you.
But I think that's
yeah.
also, again, the fun in Bible and anything historical is that you learn from the past, but also you can normally find something that clicks with you from the past. Like I read Turkish history, and it's not that I'm, 1,000 years old or anything crazy, but I hear pieces of their journey and I'm like, yep, I've totally done that. Or I've thought that through, or, communism doesn't work, you're right. You see these things and you have ideal views, but I think they kind of reshape you and they grow you, and that's what Scripture does is there's always something that you can connect with, but also you need to read it within its context. Otherwise, you're going to get a little crazy on people.
Well, John Stott talks about between the two worlds. Mm-hmm. You have to read that, and you have to read the newspaper today, and the text will fit both. Any more with that?
I agree with what Sarah said. I think you'll always find reflections or similarities between what's happened in the past and what's happened today or in the future. The past always seems to repeat itself, right? Especially when we don't heed the past. And so as we study Revelation, I think we'll begin to see similarities to our world today. And the message of Revelation and the grace of Jesus Christ holds true for our world today too, right? And so as we read Revelation, we shouldn't be surprised when we see its reflection in our relevant time. And this isn't at least the way I perceive it, it's not a countdown, but rather it's a book that we can look back to help make sense of the troubles that are in our world and of the culmination of God's love for us.
So if he says, come back, I feel like I'm losing you, you've lost your first love, that was relevant to them, but it's also true today.
Absolutely.
I would say so,
People
yes.
can lose their relationship with Jesus today and lose their first love, and it's still relevant and it's still meaningful. And it may be especially relevant because we're 2,000 years closer to whenever this fulfillment is all going to be.
Of course.
So we are ready to go to the next chapter. So please come back with us next week. GPS, find us and go online somehow, because we're going to go to the 7 churches and we'll go into Ephesus and talk again about how this fits together. And we're going to go now verse by verse through the 7 messages. We don't want you to miss it. Write us something on the email if you'd like to, gps@llbn.tv. We'd love to have you begin to engage and be part of the Bible study with us every week. God bless you.